So, next speaker is going to be Deau Regis. Went that right?
Yes.
Thank you very much. And he's about to talk about naked truth about successful test automation journey. So how they went to the 100% test automation day project. So, Regis, welcome.
Thank you. So, good morning, everybody. How are you feeling today? Well, I can't hear really anything. Good? Yes. Yes. Excellent. So today I'm here to share some experiences with you of a journey we took in OpusCapita in transitioning our regression testing to be fully automated. So I will detail the different phases of this journey, highlight how robot framework helped us in these different phases, and also give some tips along the way. Let's start with a few words about me. So my name is Regis Deau. I'm originally from France. I've been working for about 15 plus years in the software industry at different positions. I've been a developer working with test automation. I've been a manager too. And I've experienced different industries, different technology, and worked on projects of different sizes. So today I'm heading engineering at OpusCapita. And what we do at OpusCapita, we mostly work in the financial and trade worlds, where our business is around selling, buying, and paying. We handle a lot of transactions, a lot of money through our systems. So we have quite a big market, but still very little people know about OpusCapita. So it's a very specific market and specific area. The project I'm going to talk about is one of our products, our cash management solution, which is a project that allows CFO and treasury teams to better control and optimize their finances. So the beginning of our journey started when I was hired to manage software improvements and test automation. So that was really the phase one of this project, so the kickoff. And when I was hired, the managers and the people who hired me told me that we want automation. To understand a bit better what was happening in the company, I actually started by having a large survey, meeting the team, meeting the people. So I knew what was wanted, but I was thinking it's really important to understand what is needed. And in fact, when I digged into what was needed, I met a lot of people, and three major things came out. We wanted to improve quality. We were, at the time, spending a lot of time in release testing. We wanted that to be shorter, so that we'll have more time to do new things. We also wanted to improve the cadence. So we are doing 2 releases a year, and many people were studying at the time the agile release trend and wanted to go for doing delivery on a monthly basis. And the third point was that we wanted to establish a reliable basis for the future as we are writing the 5th generation of our product. So this is my first tip. Start with a strategy. Understand the context, and then understand why we are doing this kind of project, go to the how we are going to do that until you go to what will be the specific action you need to do. So make sure that your strategy contains also an end state and important milestones. So make sure that during this long project you have some milestones that will allow you to deliver early value, but also show progress to the rest of the company. A second very important tip is people. I really think that in all these kind of longer-term projects, people are really a key. Make sure that the purpose of this change, the purpose of your project is really shared with everybody so that people can embrace it, and make sure also that it's circulated around some business value. So it's not just everybody's automating, so we want to automate. Make sure that you will gain something also in your way of working or for your business. Purpose enables commitment. So make sure also that you will address that in your strategy, that you will have clear roles, expectations, and responsibilities. And finally, involvement. So some named people might be part of or mentioned in your strategy, but also I think it's a powerful thing to do to share widely the progress on your project so that you also get more people to believe in it and in many cases, many people to contribute to it. After this kickoff, we had the second phase that I've been calling fixing the basics. And what it meant for us at high level was mainly around 2 things. We wanted to stop accumulating debt, technical debt or quality debt, and we wanted to enable improvements for the future. So there were 4 things that we wanted to fix. We review our testing approach. So at the time, the product was close to 20-year-old product. We had a lot of test cases. We had a massive test asset of step-by-step test cases. So it was quite big. In the end, what was happening is that during the release testing, we always had to look at, we have a massive asset, which are the ones that we need to pick. So spending a lot of time doing risk-based analysis to select the best test cases. So in the end, always running about maybe 5 to 10% max of our test asset. So we had to focus on what are really the tests and the thing that we must test, because these are the ones that we wanted to then automate, and which are the ones that could be covered by exploratory testing during the development. We also reviewed our process, and if I more focus on the testing part, we spend a lot of time looking at the acceptance criteria that we have when we do our requirements. The reason for that is very often if you do acceptance testing, you will derive your test from this acceptance criteria. So we make them mandatory, and we spend a lot of time to make sure that the correct people are involved in specifying the requirement and writing this acceptance criteria. We also work on having much more reliable test environments to make sure that our tests are repeatable and predictable, and also review our tool chain. So we looked at our version control, our continuous integration, our build systems, our test automation tools, and also the work management tool. And this is actually when Robot Framework came into the picture. So why Robot Framework? It was easy to get started. I don't know all your experiences with it, but assuming that you have a working Python environment, pip install Robot Framework and it's up and running. So I've worked with many other tools where you spend a lot of time configuring and trying to set it up before you can actually just start it. So that was very easy, and that was something very important for us. Then, of course, if you get started with a new tool, examples. Robotframework.org contains pretty nice examples, so you can see how to structure your test cases or to write. There is a lot of very useful information. Another part that Pekka mentioned already earlier, the community, and I think it's also very important because if you work with an open source tool, there is actually a very active community. Things are moving forward. There is a lot of people that, in addition to the documentation available through robotframework.org, post actually example of code online. So besides what you can find, I would say, from the standard sources, you can also find from the community a lot of examples. So it was for me something very important. Very often, actually, when we have a problem, you just Google the problem and you find a solution already. So that's a very important thing to really get started and get speed with your project. And as a last thing, there are also many meetups. So we are lucky in Finland. Meetup, Slack, different forums, mailing list, Twitter. So there is a lot of different channels so that you can get feedback from the community. Then a third but very important point also, libraries and documentation. So I will rephrase also what Pekka was saying earlier. Robot, yes, it's a framework. There is a core part, but the library is actually something which was for us very important. And the reason for that, so if you go again on robotframework.org, you can see that in our case, we started with renewing our UI automation framework, but we had a lot of other things to test. So sometimes we test things in the database. Sometimes we actually have to run some command line tools and pass the output. So Robot Framework really helped and actually got a lot of points to be selected because it can really cover all these kind of scenarios. So that's part of this phase 2, fixing the basics. And 2 important tips that I could give here is the first one, ensure that the tooling is fitting your needs. So make sure that you have defined a process that is really working for you and make sure that the tools are really supporting this process. Don't do vice versa, that you have a tool that kind of forces you to work in a way that might not be the most efficient. So the tool needs to fit your needs, your process. And the second tip, ensure that the people are comfortable with both the tool and the process before you can really move forward and go further in this kind of test automation journey. After we had that, so we had a plan, we had a strategy, we had fixed the prerequisite, and we are controlling actually our depth. We didn't have solve at the time everything, but at least we are controlling the way to move forward. And it was time to start building the foundation for the future. So for us, we addressed that into 4 different main streams. The first one, if you remember, I was talking about this agile release train, so we wanted to work in feature branches. And as part of that, so the work has to be also managed so in our process. So we work, everything is around the feature. We have feature branches, the teams work on these features, and we had actually to make a few changes in our tool, so we migrate to Git, and we wanted to really ease the work of code review. So pull requests were taken into use, so that we can really also embed some quality very early. We also work on the continuous integration side. So we had Jenkins into use, and there was one very interesting feature for us with Jenkins is that we could lower the amount of configuration and maintenance by having Jenkins to automatically detect branches. So that every time that a development team will create a feature branch, Jenkins will automatically create the job to compile and build and run some unit tests. Unit test actually was not something that we are doing systematically at the time. I guess it's not, we are not the only company having such a problem that we have legacy where we didn't have unit tests. So it's often a problem, but we really made now in this 5th generation, this as a mandatory thing, that always a feature branch, always the unit test. And an important reason for that, for me, is that I guess many of you know the testing pyramid. And I wanted to avoid that we would try with our acceptance test to cover the whole pyramid. Because if you don't have unit tests, you will try to basically cover way too much. So I really wanted that we had actually a good layer in the bottom of unit tests or service tests, component tests that are really covering the basics and giving faster feedback to the development team, so that then we could really concentrate on the top of the pyramid with the automated acceptance test. So building the foundation when it comes to our automated test, it started by structuring our test asset. So at the time, we had already started to write many test suites. We had a lot of test cases. And what was important is also to create a folder structure to also organize these tests. So as you can see from here, a few examples. So we have this, for instance, accounts folder that contains resources, test data, and the actual tests. We repeated this kind of pattern from the different folders, and what we chose at the time was to map these higher level folders to the different modules we have in our application. It also made sense because usually the modules were the responsibility of one team. So if you work in a certain context, then if you work, for instance, in the matching team, you know that actually all your tests are here. So it's easy to find, it's easy to know what exists already. And we have less things to go through if we want to understand actually how is the coverage today. We also defined different tags in our tests. So as you can see from here, short regression, smoke, or actually NFT for non-functional tests. So the tags were for us a better way to control what tests we want to run. Another part of building the foundation was to think about integrating the tools. So we were using Jenkins for actually compiling, building our software, running our unit test, but also we had the automated test launched by Jenkins. So it was really nice that actually in the summary, you could see actually how many tests you have, how many are passing, failing, and actually even drill into the actual results and open the robot report so that you can have all the information you need, and especially in case of debugging. So going through, drilling down the information, I think was something really mandatory for us that we need to do. So by doing that, it was really good because it brought also transparency and visibility to the rest of the team of what is happening with the automated test, with the acceptance test, which used to be more the responsibility of the tester at the time. And by using these plugins, it also allowed us to have better notifications. So if a test is run, if we have had failures, we can send an email or, like in this example, send a message on the chat. So, tip for that phase, and especially when it comes to your test automation assets, I would say keep the things clean, organized, and manageable. And I put a lot of emphasis on manageable because if you remember, I was saying that before we used to have a massive amount of manual step-by-step test cases, but if you start really to automate, you will end up in a situation also where you have a huge amount of automated tests. So always think about what is for you a good amount of tests, a good duration for the test, and what makes them manageable. How much do you have failing tests? How much time do you need to spend reviewing the failed tests? So make sure that you always optimize this by organizing, cleaning, and staying in control. So managing the growth of tests, and usually this leads also to the execution time. And I think it's, from my experience, always something that sooner or later will become critical. How long does it take to run your tests? So when you start a project, you just have maybe a 50 tests, 100 tests. It doesn't take long. You don't start to think about that. And usually you start to think when it's too late. So that's also why I wanted to highlight this part here. The phase 4 then of our journey was to pull the different things together. So we had split the work in different streams to achieve this test automation goal. And it was now time to combine the report and the results from these different streams. There were two important streams that we finally needed to bind together, which were about what I would call the development flow and the test flow. So on the development side, Jenkins was at this stage able to create a job to compile the code, run the unit test, and basically do that for all the feature branches that we had. And on the other track, on the test side, we had actually scheduled with Jenkins to run nightly tests with a large test suite of acceptance tests on our master branch. And before going into this binding the stream together, one tip that I will share with you is about the whole team approach and a shared ownership. Because when you reach this point of a project, usually you will add latency in the project. Someone's test might affect the outcome of the whole team. So you don't want to go into this kind of debate of, oh, it's the tester's fault because the acceptance test doesn't pass, but my code is working and blah, blah, blah. So really, beforehand, try to make the whole team working together, taking ownership together of what it means for the team and for the project. And then you can go on the technical side and really put the things together. So what it meant for us really was simply to add all the automated test jobs we had to be part of our development pipeline. So inside these different steps, you can see that we are checking out the code, building, running unit tests, publishing some packages in a temporary repository, running all our different QA phases, deploying the code in a test environment, preparing the environment with test data, and then running our tests. If this passes, then we basically publish the artifacts. Then earlier, I was mentioning about tag, and it became something actually extremely handy if we look at what's the process of writing a new feature. So it will start by a developer creating a feature branch and writing a few commits to implement your functions. You write some unit tests, so you test already the new code that you are writing. And at some point, you will make a pull request for someone else to review the code you have been writing. If you remember, I was saying that we had configured Jenkins to automatically build feature branches. So it means that at some point, as a developer, when you feel confident enough that actually I've checked, I've written a unit test, they are passing, you can push your feature branch to the remote repository. And what it will trigger is that besides just compiling and building actually your application, it will run the unit test, but also we were using the smoke tag, and it will run also the smoke test. So we have been putting some limits so that the amount of time it takes to run the smoke test is reasonable enough for a developer to actually push and wait for a few minutes. And all that happens automatically. So in practice, it means that as a developer, you could then connect to Jenkins, and a job exists for building your code, your branch, testing, running the test, and get the results, and allows you to actually, maybe some of the tests are failing, so maybe you might do on your own some rework before you actually create a pull request. Once you do the pull request, some exchange with the person reviewing your code might happen. You might need to do some refactoring, some changes. This might also have an effect to the test, but here again, every time you make a commit, then you have the possibility to run again your test. And ultimately, you will have to merge your branch to the main branch, to the master branch in our case. And what we have is that all our tests are basically running in the master branch. So obviously, you don't want to break this master branch ever. And through this job and to this automation, a job exists, and what we have done is to be able to select what test suites using the tags you want to execute. So depending on the time you are, we have different test suites that allow you to get fast feedback in like something about 5 minutes, or more like 15 to 20 minutes, or you can actually run the whole regression test that takes about an hour. So all this can happen during that phase. So most probably the very last commit you have run all the possible tests, you feel confident, you can merge, and you really limit the chances that you will break something in the master branch when merging. Then still on the technical side, documentation. We had to come through that because we were also getting new people in the company, new people joining our team and contributing to our test automation. So we started to document the test automation, what I call implementation workflow, and started to work on coding and naming convention because we were starting to have a lot of keywords, a lot of libraries and different files. So it was important also to early have this discussion and take the steps together. And the third point was also about documenting our own library, so having embedded documentation in the code and be able to share this documentation. So we ran through the tools that we could find from robotframework.org. Some of the tools were nice for us to create actually library documentation, testing documentation. There are a lot of tools doing a lot of things, so you don't always have to write your own. And what was actually our choice at this stage was to go through Robot Framework Hub that allows you to serve via web interface the documentation. So as on this screenshot, a lot of the keyword files from our own product. So it was easy to get them, to have the list, to have some explanation, and very important actually, being able to search keywords directly. So if you have to write a new test, you can just search, okay, no one has already implemented that, it doesn't exist, okay, I can write it myself. And if I go into more details in this documentation, so you can see the keywords actually pretty simple to understand. And as Pekka was also mentioning earlier, it was also very important for us that not only people who know about coding would contribute to test automation. So we spent some effort doing that, and I think it's really worth the value. So we finally reached a phase 5 of our project where 100% of automated regression testing was done with Robot Framework. So it was an important milestone for us. And at this stage, I was thinking, yes, of course, it's important to celebrate, but why should we call it in an end? Why we don't capitalize on that? So if you have reached such level of automation in your project, usually it means that you have been putting quite a lot of efforts, quite a lot of investment. So you already have many benefits, but I think it's important to think also about what could be the next steps. And that's a tip for this last phase. So I would say review and analyze. So look at how this project went, what was easy, what was harder, what part were actually totally unknown when you started that really caused them problem, or what part were actually things where you got really good at. So look at the past, have some nice retrospective, celebrate with the team, but also think about the future. Think about what would be the next thing, what could you innovate or what we could improve. So keep the continuous improvement in mind, because if you have been taking such a journey, you are most likely to have developed this skill of looking at something and improving it for the next time. So continue doing that. So in our case, capitalizing, we're more or less into two different kind of categories of thing, extending what we do with robot framework. Earlier, I showed a tag about non-functional testing, so that was one of, I would say, the capitalization, that we will be able to cover also non-functional tests, but also API tests or component tests. So enhancing the coverage. We also rewrote some of our old tests with robot framework. Then about improvement, I think where we still want to go, and like I guess many people, is getting faster. Parallelizing the test, making sure that you could run more things much faster and have much faster feedback to support better your development. So if I recap these different phases, starting from a good strategy, fixing the basics, building foundation, pulling the things together, reach your goal, celebrate, and capitalize. As simple as that. And if I look at where we are today in terms of number, we have built in about, I would say, what is it, about a year and a half, more or less. We have about 4,100 something test cases today. We have about 100 plus test suites, same amount of libraries of our own. But the more important number is that our regression testing now is fully automated. So we don't continue writing manual step-by-step test cases. Either it's exploratory during the development or the different phases, but all the thing that we automate is basically what consists or automated regression test asset is composed of. So thank you, Robot Framework, for that. So this is the end of my presentation. I would like to finish with this quote. So if you take such a journey in automating your tests, enjoy the journey as much as the destination. It's a long road, so make sure actually that you have some fun doing that and making sure that also it's very meaningful for you. So thanks everybody for listening. Thank you for the great work from the open source community around Robot Framework, and thank you to many of my colleagues who are here also today to listen to the speech. That's about it. I managed to stay on time.
So thank you, Regis.
We have a few minutes for questions.
Yes, so questions.
I'm interested, did you use some, or do you use some test management application for your test process?
That's a very good question. Actually, that has been a very good debate, because when we moved from having these manual step-by-step test cases, we actually had a tool for test case management. In the first place, we thought that, okay, let's continue using that. So some of my colleagues here wrote some little tool that we will be able to have an ID of a test case in our system, the same in our test, and then we will be able to basically submit the test result to the system. Very quickly, actually, one big trouble for us is that the approach we have with manual test cases doing 2 releases a year is that we are building with this tool a test plan for a release. So creating a test plan, meaning that every then test case in this test plan has a different ID. And when we move to monthly releases, it becomes very painful. It means that every time we make a new test plan, we have a new ID and we need to rework all our tests to say, this test will provide result to this test case in this test plan. So basically, we dropped it totally. We dropped it totally because once actually you integrate your test as part of your process, if you want to know what test you run for a release, it's just there. So we put more effort in having clear tests, having good documentation, making all the things integrated, and then we drop totally these kind of things.
Okay, so just in my client, there is very important question, how is to integrate these results into test management, and we have QC and also micro test management, DFS. So if any of you have some knowledge about this, please come to talk to me. Thanks.
But if I want to continue actually on that, so we used to have Microsoft Test Manager. So for us, as I said, the problem was that when we wanted to have monthly releases and monthly test plans, it became an issue. But if the other option would have been, and we tried with that, to have a static test plan. Then you can bind the IDs and you could provide this kind of solution. We have time for another question?
Yes.
Yeah?
I have a bit the same problem and this man, and I think your approach is interesting. It's more AGI to support only one tool to manage our tests, but then how do you trace back to user requirements and user defects?
That's also a very good question. How can I put it? We started with the tags. So the tags, actually, they was not in the screenshot that I had, but we started to, basically, you can document your tests. So you can have in the documentation to what requirement it refers. There is always then, it's like for the test management system. Very often you will need to refer to an ID or refer to something. So we did use that at some point. Actually, I'm not sure today. My colleagues maybe could answer, but I think we didn't gain anything for that. We never had actually so much these cases where we need to really link back to things. So we started by just documenting and having these tags. So that was also a way, if you think about that, you write a feature branch. Usually this feature branch comes from a certain item in your work management system in Jira or TFS. So you have an ID, so you could also add this tag. So while you are implementing the feature, you could run the test for this specific feature, for the new feature, basically. So that's a way to do that, and I've done that in some other project, but in this case, I think we just dropped it. Because it was work to write, work to maintain, but we never needed that. So we got faster.
You are lucky.
Hi. Did you mention that you're also running non-functional testing?
Sorry?
Non-functional testing, performance,
Yes.
reliability.
Yeah.
Did you have any issues or whatever concerning those when you automated those?
So non-functional testing, actually not performance testing in that case, but maybe if I go back actually to this example that I had here. So we had this kind of test where coming from actually our product owners, it's more what I would say end-to-end efficiency more than really pushing the performance to find what are the bottlenecks in the application. So we have had this kind of requirement where we expect the application to respond under a certain time. So if you think about the way that the Selenium library is where you can actually put a timeout on certain actions. So this was when the idea came that actually certain kind of tests we can automate. So not really pushing the limit that then would require also that you have load generators or other powerful things that you can do. Actually, we could do that too, but we haven't been focusing on that at the moment. So it has been more making sure that the response times most of the time are under certain criteria. So about loading pages, about navigation, about different things like that.
All right, thank you. Unfortunately, you are running out of time, so I think there was one hand up, but you can talk in the hallways.
Yes.
And huge thanks, Regis. Again, applause, please.
Thank you. Thank you.
There's a speaker present, and you can also get a free T-shirt from the counter. So just ask the guy over here that you have one. Thank you very much.
Thank you.